Hi folks, Chuck Black here. We are doing 52 weeks of Python. We are in week number 26. That's halfway. How about that? We are beginning a session on networking, or a module on networking, and the lesson for today is going to be Netmiko. I've written some code, as you see running over here on the right. I will talk in general about what it's like to communicate with devices and how Abstraction helps you out with packages like Netmiko, Napalm, etc. We will be looking at the code that I wrote that does the connection to devices. We will also be looking via the debugger at what it actually looks like when you connect to a device in Netmiko code, and then how that accesses Paramiko. We'll be talking about things at a relatively high level. We're not doing a deep dive into every different parameter that can be passed to Netmiko, but this is really to show you how you can use tools like Netmiko in your Python application to successfully and simply connect with devices. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so we're in this section that I called networking. It's where we do communication with devices and also some other stuff as well. And today's topic is going to be Netmiko. So I have some code that we're going to go through, but before we do that, I want everybody to understand exactly what it is that we're talking about when we discuss how we talk to devices. And so I have a couple of slides to help describe this. So you're going to be writing an application and communicating to some devices that live out here in your network or in the cloud or wherever they might be. Now, if you wanted to, you could just open a socket in Python and handle all of the handshaking for doing SSH or whatever you might be doing yourself, but you don't really want to do that, and there are tools that have been written to help us with that. So we're going to start at the most basic in terms of my discussion here, and that is Paramiko. Paramiko is a library that helps you to communicate using SSH to devices. So it takes care of a lot of the SSH details for you, and so you don't have to worry about that. But what you do have to worry about is doing your login appropriately. What I mean by that is not so much your credentials, but more handling the initial screen that you get back from the device, getting to the initial prompt, etc. And so you have to handle that yourself. If you're going to do Paramiko, you have to get through those initial screens. Then two really important things is you talk to different devices, there are going to be command differences. That is, some devices say show interface, some say show interfaces. Some require you to be in the IP context in order to look at things like ARP table, etc. And we'll look at that depending on the different devices that you're talking to. And even if the devices are only, let's say, Cisco, within Cisco, there are many different product families that have evolved from different companies or different groups that develop them. And so they have different commands that you have to do. That's one thing. Another thing that's very difficult as well is you have to implement what are called screen scrapers, which is looking at the output that comes back to you in some type of textual format that's been done to make it easier for a human to read, that oftentimes make it difficult for a computer to make sense of. And not only that, but different devices provide their output in different formats for tables and different dashes and colons and indentation, etc. And then finally, when you're done with all of that stuff, then you can have your code, which is basically figuring out what it is that you wanted to do in the first place. So Paramiko does give you a great amount of help. You don't have to do SSH, but you do have to handle a lot of stuff. A step up from that would be Netmiko. Now, Netmiko runs on top of Paramiko and utilizes Paramiko underneath, but what it does is it adds some functionality for dealing with networking devices. So a lot of the login issues you no longer have to deal with, and it does smooth out some of this stuff. But in general, I'm speaking, you will need to still be aware of the fact that if you're talking to a Nexus device, you need to use this command, and if you're talking to an iOS CSR device, you need to use a different type of command. And so you need to understand command differences, and of course the outputs are going to be different as well. Something as simple as saying get me the version number are entirely 100% different depending on if you're dealing with an iOS type device versus an NXOS device. And then once you're done with that, you still have to write your code. If you use something like Napalm, which we will be going into, and that in Quokka I actually use Napalm, then at least, and I'm showing you a picture only in a SSH context here, so don't get ahead of the game. Napalm runs on top of Netmiko, which is running on top of Paramiko, and Napalm very nicely abstracts or removes your need to understand command differences, both within a product, within a product family and sets of product families, but also across different vendors. And so that's a wonderful thing. Furthermore, it parses the output for you and puts it into nice Python data structures. So the improvement in reducing the work that you have to do is tremendous when you move from something like Netmiko to Napalm. Now, the downside is you're at the mercy of Napalm to do everything correctly, but since there are so many people with so many hands in making sure that it works, giving feedback, etc., then you're in pretty good hands there. So all you in general need to worry about is your code. Now, this is not going to be 100% true, and you may, as I have, run into some quirkiness or things that don't seem to work with Napalm, but in general, it's much easier for you. So I've been talking about something as I went through this kind of evolutionary path where you have more and more simple ways to do things. What we would call this is the abstraction level gets to be greater, and it gets to be made way simpler in order to do things. And that's what we're talking about here. Let's review some of the things that you get with abstraction. There's two main categories that you need to be aware of. One thing is abstraction hides all of these details from you, so you don't have to. For example, Paramiko hides all the details of SSH handshaking. You don't have to worry about that. In a like manner, Netmiko handles a lot of the login stuff that you would have had to deal with before. Napalm, of course, handles lots of details of how you actually communicate with your device in terms of commands that you give it, etc. So it handles the details and it handles the differences. So the second, or kind of a little bit different slant on this, is not only does it handle all the nitty-gritty details that you don't want to have to deal with, but it also handles differences. And down here I'm going to mention it handles difference between your different product families. So maybe your iOS device does not communicate in the same way that this NXOS device does, and so it handles those differences. And not only that, but at a broader level, if you have multiple vendors, then you can, at least in theory with abstraction, deal with them in the same way across vendor lines. So if you're talking to a Cisco device versus talking to a Juniper device and you say, get me the interfaces, then the data, in theory anyway, comes back to you exactly the same. You don't have to know the Cisco commands. You don't have to know the Juniper protocols. You don't have to understand any of that stuff, but you're able to get it. In the same way, even within a product family, if you're just a Cisco customer or just a Juniper or Arista or HP customer, then it works across different product lines within a vendor. And one thing that it does give you, both in communication on input and output, is it gives you a common interface. So you only have to write your code once, and all of the details are taking place underneath you. In the Netmiko situation, you have to have in your code special constructs to deal with vendor differences. And it's, of course, worse in Paramiko. In Napalm, at least in theory, once again, you only have to deal with the interface that Napalm gives you. That's this common interface piece. So you just deal with that interface for making requests and for getting results. And that's all you have to worry about. You don't have to worry about who implemented the device or what product family it is from. Now, if you're on top of things, or maybe you've been down this path before, then you may be saying, everything that you've said about Napalm is true, and it's a wonderful thing that it does, but it doesn't only handle SSH. And so my next slide that we're going to look at is showing you this as well. This detail down here under abstraction is the same. We're still talking to devices, but one thing that Napalm does in providing you multi-vendor support is it also provides you multi-protocol support. In fact, I'm going to modify this and call it multi-protocol. So you get multi-vendor and multi-protocol support. So not only can I talk to Juniper as well as Cisco and Arista and HP, etc. devices, but I can be doing SSH, I can be doing netconf, I can be using a mechanism like NX API, which underneath may be doing SSH. If there's a device that does RESTconf on the device, then perhaps it will make use of that as well. I'm not sure of the details of that, but it supports multiple protocols. So it's not just a single protocol supporting solution, Napalm, but it supports all these different protocols. So if you have some like iOS XR devices that do netconf or Juniper devices that do netconf, then it will do netconf. If you have devices that still require you to do SSH and use the CLI, then it can do that. I believe that NX API under the covers does that as well. I'm not super familiar with it. If there are RESTconf ones, then it will do RESTconf for you as well. And I don't know the answer to that. I've only been using Napalm a little while. In fact, the first time I used it was when I built Quokka. But I am impressed with its versatility and its multi-vendor, multi-protocol support. Now, one thing that I am a little bit familiar with, because while I did do Cisco Python class and talk to Cisco devices, I used Paramiko pretty much exclusively. So I was dependent on doing stuff like this to communicate with devices. When I built a similar Python class for Juniper, they have a library that is very cool. It's called PyEasy. It is a Python interface that you run with your application, and you communicate to the PyEasy interface only, and it does all the netconf stuff down below. So it makes your life very, very easy. It is possible that Napalm might use PyEasy for doing netconf to Juniper devices. I'm just guessing. I have no idea if that's true or not. If they've already implemented netconf for other devices, then probably not, but I'm just throwing that out there. But this is nice if you're working with Juniper devices. There's this really nice library, 100% Python, that makes it very easy to just create a client and then talk to the device in Python language. You don't have to know anything about networking protocols for communicating with the devices. I'm not a huge Cisco person, so I do not know. I've looked and I don't see any PyEasy equivalent in my quick perusal. So I don't know if there is something that does this. It would have to be a Python library that runs with your application. It's not something that runs on the devices. I know Cisco has stuff that you enable on devices for doing certain types of functionality. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something that uses a standard protocol like netconf to communicate with devices down there. I don't know if that exists, but it would be nice if it does. Feel free to let me know if you are an expert in this topic. But this is an overview of the stuff that we will kind of be talking about a little bit here in this networking. Now let me give you a little bit of an idea what we're going to be talking about in this next module, Module 04, Networking. So I do want to let you know what it is that we will be talking about in the next few weeks, probably, when we do this networking stuff. Now, you may be looking at this, and for those of you that are network engineers, you're rubbing your hands in glee and saying, well, this is so cool, we're going to be spending forever talking about this and going into the deepest of deep dives on every one of these topics. That's not actually true. I created this folder and all of these files intending to at least consider implementation of some of this stuff. I can tell you there are certain of these that I've implemented. I've implemented connect interface counters, napalm config, napalm example, I have a netconf example. We've looked at that a little bit before. We're going to be doing Netmiko here. I do have Nmap. I don't do Norner or PyATS. I do have PyShark example. I don't have a RESTconf example. Routing is just thrown in there. I do have Scapy. I don't have SNMP or versioning. So some of these are implemented, some are not. If you wanted to look at this and say, gee, Chuck, I would really love it if you would tackle this particular topic, or maybe one that I haven't shown you here that falls under the category of networking. I wish that you would discuss this, and if there's enough interest from other folks, then I will consider doing that. So feel free to do that. But I just want you, I've left some of these in, like, I guess RESTconf, I left it in. It's blank right now. Don't know if I'm going to be doing anything with that. If you have a good example and you have a good reason why I should do that, and enough people think that it's worthwhile, then I will consider doing it. The other thing is that I could complete networking, and then once I've done Flask and object-oriented and concurrency and SQL alchemy, database type stuff, I can always come back and add more. Probably easy to convince of that, because I find it to be fun to write code and to talk about it. That's why I'm doing this. And so feel free to, if there's something that you want me to address, feel free to talk to me about that. Okay, that's kind of what we're going to be doing. Now let's jump into Netmiko. So let's start looking at this Netmiko code that I have written. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and run this Netmiko example, and it's going to pop up and run here, and I'm going to be explaining stuff while it runs because it does take a while, and I will come back and go through this, but I just want to go ahead and let it run just so that we get it done, the running of it done. So if you look over here with me, you will be able to see the code that I have written. Now the code that I have written has gone through a number of edits. At a very high level, let me tell you what I'm going to do. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a CSR device and an NXOS device. These are going to be using the sandbox devices that are out there in the Cisco cloud. So they are always on, or at least they allegedly are always on. I periodically come into my here and I see up. So it was off for a while. If you were quick enough to see that X just changed to a check mark. So it has a tendency to come up and go down, but it seems to be okay right now. So I'm going to go through each device, and for each device, I'm going to connect to it, and then I'm going to send it a command. These are CLI commands. My command is going to say, show me the running config. I just realized that I didn't make that into a constant because I just uncommented this. That's why. So I'll show you what I've done. Then I'm going to do show IP route. Then I'm going to do show ARP. Then I'm going to do show interface or interfaces description. And then I'm going to go show interface or interfaces brief. And I'm going to do that for all of the devices. So you can see I've got a fairly large for loop that does all of these things. And then what I did, because I am trying to teach you not just, okay, here's the API for getting this command and here's how you run it. Like you can get that from 1,000,001 different websites out there that have network engineering examples. What I'm trying to do is teach you to be a software developer. And so I went through this, and as I added more and more things, I said to myself, this is getting to be a lot of extra code and it's a lot of duplication. Maybe there's a better way to do it. And since I only have 2 devices, what I realized was I could do this in a different way, which is sort of similar to something I did recently in one of the weeks prior, and I can't remember what week it is, but I'll show you the code here and what I've done. What I basically am doing now is I'm cycling through all of the different commands. What are the commands? The commands are these things that I defined up here. So I defined all these. If I ended up having 5 or if I ended up having 20, I will have exactly the same amount of code, which is this smaller amount of code right here. All I'm doing is connecting at the beginning, and then I'm cycling through. And for in this situation, I only have 2 devices, which is why I can do it this way. Now, if I wanted to, I could cycle through multiple devices inside this, and I could make this code even smaller, because I'd have a for loop inside a for loop. So I would have the commands on the outside, and then I would have devices on the inside for loop, or I could do it the other way around. But so what I'm doing is I'm getting the command type and the command itself, and then I'm going through and I'm actually doing send command and referencing that command constant dictionary that I set up right here. It's actually a dictionary of dictionaries. So I have the CSR command and the NXOS command. And if we look at this really quick, you can see, okay, well, those commands are the same. That's good. But in order to show my ARP table for the CSR, I can do that. For my NXOS device, I need to do show IP ARP. And here you can see for the CSR, I say show interfaces. For Nexus device, I have to say show interface. And in this situation, it's backwards. I have to do show IP interface brief, and for Nexus, I do show interface brief. I don't have to do the IP in that situation. They both have a show version, but as we'll see, and this is the last thing that I do, and I make a comment here that this is the harder or the trickier part, is parsing the output. This up here is showing us the difference on, let me come back to this. Remember, I mentioned in this slide, and you were saying, I wish you wouldn't spend so much time talking about this, but what I mentioned was there's going to be differences in both the input as well as the output. And so this is what we were looking at here. Command differences and output differences. And so when I come back here and look at this, this is representing my command differences, and my parsing down here, where I'm actually parsing the output, is where I'm parsing the output different, where I'm having to deal with the differences in the output. And we just did regular expression thanks to my buddy who recommended that I do regular expressions. That allowed me to come in here and create patterns for doing extracting the version from these particular types of devices. And so I have a search, and I'm extracting the version number, and then I print it out. You can see we're right down here at the bottom, and here's my Nexus version number and my CSR version number right there. And if you just want to see what the difficulty is, this is my show version command output for my Nexus device. There's a lot of stuff in there. And if the good news is it's very easy to use a regular expression to go through it, and I just was able to pick this out. But if I look at my output from show version for my CSR device, where is it? It's right here. This one is even worse, actually. It's even got all of this garbage in it, and it looks like they have lots of disclaimers, blah, 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 blah. It eventually shows somewhere in this mess. Let's see, where was it? At the beginning? Is that where the version was? Yeah, very first line actually was right there. Now the thing that makes this difficult is Cisco may change how they display the version number to make it more readable. Somebody could come along and say version : and then this value, and that would screw us up. Or there could be other of these copyright notices, and if I was trying to find it based on just line number, maybe they put a copyright up here above the version number. So you have to be intelligent in how you do this, and that's why I mentioned that it was a little bit difficult. So let's look at the code and see what it actually does. Now that we have an overview of what I'm doing in this code, of course you can look at this code yourself. You can go to the repository out on GitHub and clone it and pull it down, and you can look at it and play with it. But let me go over it for you. Now the fundamental aspect of what you do when you're dealing with devices in Netmiko is the first thing you need to do is you need to connect to them. And the second thing that you're going to do is you're going to send them a command. Now this command could be simple show commands, which is all I'm doing in this lesson is going to be to show certain things. I'm actually glad that I left this here because it makes it easier for you to see. When I come down here and do send command, this command that I'm going to be looking at comes from my command table, and it's actually going to be something exactly the same, but it's easy to see right here. So I may just leave this just for readability and rememberability for you guys, so you don't get overwhelmed, for those of you that are new, having to deal with a two-level nested deep dictionary of dictionaries. So connect, which is a routine that I wrote. It's a function that I wrote, and we'll show you what it looks like. And then from that, you'll have a connection, and then you use that connection and you invoke the send command method, and it will send this command to the device. It takes care of all of the SSH-iness, and it gets the output for you, and it returns it in the output of this call. And as you see, if I was to go to the very top up here, I can get up there. This is the beginning. I say I'm connecting to my device on port 8181, and then I do running configuration. And then this is actually, if you look at this, this is the running configuration of that device that's out there in the Cisco cloud. This is all of the gory details for that device that everybody else is doing. And then the next thing that I do is I do the next command, which is show IP route. You can see that's this right here. So my IP route output is this right here. Now, looking at this, you probably say, oh yeah, well that's easy to understand. I can figure that out because I deal with Cisco CLI all the time, and this means blah, and that means blah, etc. However, if you were attempting to build a Python dictionary that had entries for every route and the actual value was the destination, so it would be the actual device that it's going to have to go through. It's going to be through it's going to have information about the interface, etc. You would say, oh, well, it's easy for me as a human to see this, but how do I get my Python program to understand that? Well, it can be quite difficult, and parsing it is, I've actually created code that did this for my Cisco class. And so it's possible to do using regular expressions and kind of cheating to get through this and looking for the first line after, let's say, the gateway of last resort, etc. If you have something like napalm, as you know from our discussion, napalm makes you not have to worry about that. It gives everything back to you in a Python object, so it's a lot easier to do. But parsing this would be a difficult task, and when you look at the output for, we'll look at it in a second, for a Nexus device, it's an entirely different format for the way that it outputs it. So you have to understand the device that you're dealing with in order to parse the output. So this is what you do. So that you do send command, and then you get the output back. Now, I glossed over this thing right here, this connect. Let's look at it because it's very important. I'm going to do Control B on my PyCharm, and that's going to take me to this code right here. So this, I've called it connect. It actually lives here in my project, in my M04 networking package as part of my Python 52 weeks project. So it lives right there. I called it connect when I thought about this. I think I believed maybe I was going to be doing more Netmiko stuff than I ended up doing. I found out that once I started to use napalm that, wow, this would be a lot easier and a lot better. So maybe I should have called this something else because I'm using different tools here, and connect is a generic term. Maybe I should name it something else. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you what I can do with respect to PyCharm and how it makes my life easier. I've decided I don't like this name, and so I'm fearful, gee, I wonder how many places in my code I call connect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on connect. I'm going to come down here to where it says go to show me all declarations or usages of connect. And so this is showing me, okay, well here, a Netmiko example on line 1, I'm importing it. On line 27, this is all my usages. I'm calling it here, I'm calling it here. So now I know I'm calling it in Netmiko example. So I think, okay, well that's good. It is only Netmiko. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this again and I'm going to say refactor. And what am I going to do? I'm going to rename it and I'm going to call this Netmiko Connect _connect. I'm going to assume that that's a reasonable name. I may not even like that afterwards, but I'm going to say refactor. And at this point, PyCharm is going to go look and see where it was used. And it's telling me that it is being used. Here's where it's defined. Let me get rid of this. Here's where it is defined. There's my connect process. And here are the references. 4 references in the file. There's the import statement and then these other statements. And so it's saying, do you want me to do the refactor? And I'm going to say, yes, I do want you to do the refactor. So now here, it's called that Netmiko Connect. But if I go back to my Netmiko example, if it did this correctly, and I'm not sure that it always does, then here it says from connect, import Netmiko Connect. And here I have Netmiko Connect in this one. And if I just, as a PyCharm point of reference, I'm doing a Control F here. That allows me to look for something in this file. I'm going to look for connect open parentheses because if I have an old example of this, then I will find it. So I'm going to go, there's my Netmiko Connect, Netmiko Connect. Oh, sorry, that was disconnect. Netmiko Connect, Netmiko Connect. And disconnect is actually a Netmiko call, so I don't have to worry about those, the disconnects. Okay, so it looks like I'm good to go, that this has actually worked. So that's an example of how you can do some level of refactoring if you decide that you don't like it that much. I was thinking I might change the name here, but maybe what I will do is if I had a napalm connect function, I could put it in here. And you know what? I just realized I lied to you. I do have a disconnect function in here, and it's actually connection.disconnect. I don't know that I ever actually used this. Let's go here and see if we can find this out. I'm not doing a refactor. I'm going to declaration or usages. So here I am calling connection.disconnect in these situations, but I'm not actually using my own disconnect. So that's just for those of you that understand what I just did. That's great. For those of you that didn't, just blow it off for right now. I can explain it more later, but I don't want to dive into it too deeply. So I've fixed my connect to Netmiko Connect, and this is what I'm going to explain to you now. So here's the connect statement. Let's look at what this connect statement is. Now you look at this and let me ask you, you see that this is capitalized. What is that telling you? That is telling you that this is going to be a class. So I'm creating an instance of this class. We would call that an object. In Python, we know everything's an object, but in object-oriented programming, now you know, okay, well, you're actually using an object here. So I'm creating this Netmiko object, and I'm passing in these 5 parameters. What am I passing in? Well, if you were to just look here, you could in general say, well, I think you're passing in the host name, the port, the username, the password, and the device type, and the answer would be, yep, that's exactly what I'm doing. You want to go back a little bit, though, and figure out, all right, well, what is all of this? This is referencing my device type. So when I called in, I said, I want you to connect to a particular device type. In real grown-up functionality, you'd probably be passing in the device itself, but because I'm just doing this for training purposes, I'm passing in remember if we go back here, I'm going to be passing in when I do the connection, the device type, which is going to be this string CSR or the string NXOS. That's what I'm actually iterating through. So I'm going through my one CSR device and my one NXOS device. That's what I'm doing here. And so if it's a CSR device, this is a dictionary of dictionaries, then my host name is going to be this value, the port is this value, the username is this value, etc. As I said, this is just kind of training. I've simplified it for training purposes, but that is what this is doing. Cisco Sandbox device is this thing right here. Remember, it's a dictionary of dictionaries. This first subscript, if you will, is going to be the very first level of the dictionary, which is the device type. That's this or this. That's the first level. The second subscript, if you will, is going to be host name, and that is this thing right here. Now you may look at this and say, well, you repeated host name 3 times. What if you were to spell it wrong? Isn't that a poor programming practice? Wouldn't it be better to do it like you did it up here, where you use constants such as this? This is a different type of item, but instead of having to type in IP route all over the place, I did show IP route like this, and I was able to use it over and over again and not have to worry about typos. And my answer to you would be, you're 100% correct. If I had done this better, then I probably would have had constants for hostname, port, username, password, and device type. So that would have been my recommended way to do it, because here I'm having to do it once, do it twice, do it 3 times, and there's an opportunity to spell it wrong. Like sometimes this will be PS word or something like that. All right, but let's look at what it does. This is calling into Netmiko, and it's saying, I want you to go ahead and create this device for me, and it's going to pass back the connection. From that point, I'm going to have this thing called connection, and now I can just do boom, send command, show running config, boom, send command for show IP route, the appropriate command, send command, and send command. Once I have connection, life has become very easy. So this is the code that goes and creates my connection in Netmiko, and then I do send command. This is how I do it when I iterate through the device types, and I have to explicitly do every single command. And I mentioned that that's probably not the best way to do it. Doing it something like this is better. So in this situation, this is actually the code that is doing it. This is where I do my CSR command and my Nexus command. And we mentioned that I could have even put a for loop in here, right? A for loop that looked basically like this for device type in CSR and XOS, and then that would have made it even less. I would have only had one send command, and that might be a better way to do it. Now the next thing that I want to tell you is this, and we're going to go through this in the debugger in just a minute, but you see this thing sitting right here. What is this all about? Well, it's because I'm about to do this other thing of parsing the data, and I didn't want to have to come through and connect again, because that takes like 15 seconds for every single device. And so just if I was doing a show version, then I stored the CSR output and the Nexus output. So that's all that this is. So in the normal, that's why I say the loop here is really from here to there. Whoops, from there to, let's see if I can do this correctly, from there down to this part right here. All right, and so here I'm storing the output of my show version command. Why? Because I wanted to explain to you the difficulty in getting that data. Now, by the way, if you are ever minimize your output window, depending on whether you've stored it down here on the bottom or on the right, I've stored mine on the right, it puts this little thing right here. If I just click on it, then it brings it back to life so that I can actually look at it. And I'm going to scroll. Actually, I'm going to drag it all the way down to the bottom. And this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get 9.3 parentheses 3 and 16.09.03 out of these long verbose version strings that I get. And I left it that way on purpose, just to make it more difficult to parse. And what I've done is I've taken, whoops, I'm going to get rid of this again. I've taken these two things that I said I stored, CSR versions raw and Nexus version raw, and I say if I've gotten both of those, because sometimes these fail, then I'm going to go through and I'm going to have my pattern is very simple. I'm just looking for NXOS : space version space, and then I'm looking for whatever comes next before the end of the line. And so basically, and these are all a little bit fraught with peril, what I'm basically looking for is everything after NXOS version. Let me make it so that we can see this. NXOS version space. So it will match this, and then I'm basically trying to capture everything to the end of the line. Now, if you're not a regular expression guru, don't worry about that. Let me just explain this to you, because I went through a few iterations, because I also am not a regular expression guru. There's a couple things to be aware of here. Number one, a dot means match anything. Okay? Match one of anything. A star means match 0 or more of whatever you just matched. So this is basically saying match 0 or more of whatever comes up until the end of the line. So basically, because I'm ending it here, I could have put a \n, but it matches it to the end of the line. In this output, everything has an end of line in it when I get it back from the Cisco device. So this, I was able to get rid of my \n here. And for the CSR version, I was matching Cisco iOS XE software version whatever. And if you recall, if I get right here, Cisco iOS XE software, version, space, and then it matched everything until the end of the line. So that's good. Now your next question, and appropriately so, is why do we have parentheses around this? And the reason is, with regular expressions, and I didn't go through a lot of detail, I can't remember if I even mentioned this in my regular expression discussion, but basically, regular expressions, when matches are made, it puts the matches into particular groups based on parentheses. You can even name some of these groups, and you'll see very confusing looking regular expressions where you can give a name to a group. I'm not using a name for my group. Group number 0, if I want to get it, is everything that was matched. Okay, so the entire thing. Group number 1 is the first thing in parentheses. If I had more things in parentheses, it would be number 2, number 3, number 4, etc. But I only have one of these things, and so it would be called group number 0. Group 1. Group 0, I hope I said that correctly, is the whole thing. So group 1 is going to be the first thing that's been explicitly placed in parentheses, and that is what I'm going to want to extract when I do my match, and it's going to be the same thing here. So here is my here's the pattern, here's the match using that pattern on Nexus version raw, and here's my match on the CSR version raw in the pattern. And if I got a match from NXOS, then I'm going to print out NXOS version parts from output, and I'm going to take that match thing, that's this object that I got back, and I'm going to call into this function that says group, and I'm passing in this parameter of 1 that says get me group number 1, which is the second group, because you remember everything starts at 0, which is going to be this group right here. So whatever you matched there, give that to me, and I do the same thing here. Give that to me. And lo and behold, and remember this is my F string, so the fact that it's in curly braces, This is actually going to be a variable, and Python very smartly with an F string, when it sees curly brackets, and even PyCharm is smart enough to ungreen it and make it into something that looks like code, because that's what it is. And that is what it's going to print out. And when we look down here at the very bottom, sure enough, it printed out 9.3 parentheses 3 and 16.09.03. That is how I did that. Now I'm going to tell you, this is a pretty easy regular expression pattern match and search. If I had had to do stuff like the routing table that we were looking at, oops, here's another routing table, or even, this is interfaces. These are all my interfaces. This is actually a nice table. The Nexus stuff I find to be much easier to parse if I have to do that. Here's a routing table. This is from the Nexus. This is my routing table. If you have to parse this, then it can be a lot more difficult, and the CSR one was even worse when it comes to regular expression matching. But this is how you would get the output if you're just using Netmiko to get version information from a device. So this lesson has gotten to be kind of long already, and yet I feel like I've only kind of scratched the surface. One thing that I would tend to do, and I will with other stuff that we talk about, is show you how it is used in Quokka. The good news is Netmiko is not actually used at all in Quokka, so I don't have to show you that. But instead, let me add in something that you may find a little bit fun, which is let's have a session with the debugger and walk through this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this in the debugger, and we are going to look at what happens. Boom, I've already hit my Netmiko connect. What I want to do here is I want to dive into it, so I'm going to use step into. This is going into my own code right here, where I'm stepping into the code that's going to do the connect eventually. All I'm doing right now is I am setting stuff up. I'm going to print out. Beware, this is going to take a while. And now I'm going to go into the Netmiko code, and I can just say step until if you'll see this go through all of the parameters that we're passing in. Bink, bink, bink. Now it's going to go into Netmiko. Now I want to dive in, and you're saying, wait a minute, you can dive into somebody else's code? Yes, you can. This is one of the nice things about Python, and with open source code like that, it's totally available. So here I am in the actual code for Netmiko, and that's pretty cool, right? If you were to look here up at the breadcrumbs, you can see I'm in code that is at /user local lib python 3.8 dist packages Netmiko SSH dispatcher. How cool is that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step through this, and let's see what happens. Okay, I'm going to call the SSH dispatcher. In fact, why don't I dive into SSH dispatcher? Up there it is. I'm going to return class mapper, so there's nothing really of interest there. And now I'm going to go call into connection class. I'm going to actually create an object of class connection class. So I'm going to go down here. Well, I'm in base connection here. I'm in the bowels of Netmiko right now, and I'm going to begin to go through this. One thing I wanted to point out, let's see if I can even point this out here. Hey, guess what? Guess what gets imported? Paramiko is imported in this code here. So this is kind of an idea that, oh wow, well this might be doing something that is, using some of the other library stuff. So here I am right here. I could walk through this code. I'm not going to walk through all of it, but you can see I could go through here. I'm setting up the response return. If it's IP, if I passed in an IP address, which I did, let's look at self.host. So here's self. Let's see what is the value of host. Hey, look at that. I'm looking at Netmiko code, and I'm looking at this object, and it has set the host to my actual device that I'm communicating with. How cool is that? So you could do this and step through this. As you can see, the Netmiko code, this is just the base connection. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So it is a very large thing. But I'm going to say, whoa, that's enough for me. I want to step back and get back to my code. And let's see if this is going to let me get back to my code. I'm not sure why. Oh, there we go. Okay, it took a long time because, like I say, establishing a connection takes a long time. I am in the SSH dispatcher. I'm going to say, let's return. I'm back in my own code. That is so awesome. So I am here at my own code. I have this thing called a connection. This connection is actually, how about that? There's a lot of stuff in there, and that's just the first level. So you can see there's remote connections. Guess what? My remote connection, it's a Paramiko connection. So you can actually see that under the covers, Netmiko is using Paramiko. It's just making things better. And frankly, that's one of the cool things about using Python is that there's so much stuff written for it, and it all tends to utilize other stuff. That's very helpful. All right, and that would be my returning of my connection. Let's continue through here. Now I have my connection, and now if I were to go through here and I was to go into send command, this will be the last thing probably that I do. Here I am. I'm actually getting some stuff verified, and now it's going to go down into the actual send command, and I believe, here we are in send command of Netmiko. See this Netmiko base connection? There's actually remember this is a function within a class, so we call it, what's the word for it? We call it a method. So this is my method, and you can see I'm not going into all of these different things, but there are a whole lot of different parameters that can be passed in that allow us to do stuff, but I'm not going to worry about that. But anyway, that is your Netmiko and what we do, okay? Hopefully this gives you a good idea for how Netmiko is used. It's running the send command, and it's going to eventually be returning back to me. And now, when I'm done with this, guess what? Let's look at, I'm in my code now. My output is a string. Let's look at the string. This is the string, and it's actually the actual what does it show? Running config output. So pretty cool, fun to walk through stuff in the debugger. This is one of the reasons that I like using IDEs. Hopefully this has been a good introduction to using something like Netmiko. Well, that was a lot of good stuff, wasn't it? We've been talking about communicating with networking devices using Netmiko. We've looked at an overview of the different packages that are available and how they help you to various degrees to do abstraction when you're communicating with devices to make your life simpler. We looked at some code that communicated with devices, particularly they connect to devices, and then we did commands to devices. We looked even via the debugger at how you can dive down into the code that does the connection, that does the commands, etc. Hopefully this has been a useful, pretty high-level overview of communication using Netmiko, and that it will be helpful to you in the future as you begin to write Python applications that actually talk to network devices. Thanks a bunch.